There are some shows that stay with you forever, be it because you discovered them when you were young, or because they spoke to you on a spiritual level. I have no idea at what age I discovered Yu Yu Hakusho, but I know I must have been very young, because the series has reached an almost mythical status in my mind. This story has been with me for so long that I sometimes question its existence, half convinced that I must have imagined the entire thing, mostly because it aligns so perfectly with my imagination that it looks tailored to my tastes. I don't remember where I first set sights on those books, but I know that it was happenstance, as if the tomes had chosen to reveal themselves to me. With time, these random encounters multiplied, gradually unveiling the plot, as if this adventure was a treasure that had to be earned. It took me more than 10 years to get my hands on every volume, but when I finally did, it felt like I had just completed an epic quest. And looking back, it is undeniable that this saga played a huge role in my development, both in physical and spiritual terms. Today, I want to invite you on that journey, as I explain to you why reading/watching Yu Yu Hakusho will make you level up. If the brain of a functioning story is its plot, then its heart is to be found in the cast. This is where Yu Yu's strength resides, and what first drew me towards this manga. Unlike many shows at the time, the characters actually look human, making them more relatable to younger readers. Of course, more extreme male power fantasy also had my favor. But when you're a scrawny prepubescent kid, it's a bit tough to project yourself in a story where the average male has biceps the size of your head. Even though Goku was still my hero back then, my skinny self felt more connected to Yuzuke, who looks nothing like your typical average anime teenager. Despite his insane compatibility, he's still imperfect, making him a sympathetic main character and giving the audience a chance to grow alongside him. As much as I enjoy monolithic Giga Chads with square jaws and stoic personalities, it felt refreshing to be able to follow someone that looked like me. And if you're at the start of your lifting journey, I'm sure this is a feeling that you'll share as well. However, the small stature of its hero doesn't stop the show from being a muscle fest, or else I wouldn't be recommending it. The vast majority of the cast is constituted of yoked motherfuckers, with mugs the likes of which would give your average soy boy the shits for a week. Yuzuke being small only reinforces the gigantism of these other characters, whose fighting techniques wouldn't look out of place in a bar brawl, something that coincides with the show's grungy 90s aesthetic. Forget magic spells and all that fairy shit. The fights are done mano a mano, with big old haymakers and knuckle sandwiches. Most of the time, a special move will just be some bearded dude flexing his biceps and clotheslining the fuck out of everyone in his vicinity. Sure, there's some level of sorcery involved, but it's reduced to its simplest expression. And characters rarely battle using projectiles, electing instead to punch holes into one another. That is, of course, when they're not engaging in all-out maiming fiestas, which invariably end in horrible cases of disfiguration. Exposit number 1, Yuzuke, who shoots lasers from his fingers, and yet still prefers to do stuff like that. The author, Yoshihiro Togashi, would later develop an incredibly complex power system in the form of Nen. But his first attempt closer resembles Ki from Dragon Ball Z. So if you're the type to only enjoy traditional physical showdowns, you're in luck, because that's 99% of what the show does. As demonstrated by the character of Toguro. He's huge, he's cool, and he only relies on his fists. But before I start talking about my favorite meathead, let's discuss the medium in which to consume this manga. Even though I personally discovered Yu Yu Hakusho in book form, I strongly recommend you watch the anime instead. I know this is blasphemy coming from a manga reader, but this is one of the rare cases where the TV adaptation might actually be better than the source material. For two simple reasons. 1. Togashi's drawing style is quite erratic, and while I personally enjoy his flair, it can throw some people off. And 2, because the entire anime is available on YouTube in HD, with an English dub that is actually more than decent for those of you who might be allergic to Japanese. Yu Yu's soundtrack is also spectacularly good. It's what I'm using in the background right now. The show possesses that unmistakable 90s charm, and is quite accessible even for people who have never watched anime before. If the first season is to your liking, and you make it to episode 23, you'll finally get acquainted with my favorite character, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Toguro himself. When I told you that Yu Yu Hakusho was a thick boy gallery, I wasn't lying. One look at the main antagonist is enough to understand that. He stands supreme amongst all the buff characters in the show, which is saying something considering that the fat-free mass index of the average grunt is around 46. His power is simple. He can freely control his flex. That's it. The main obstacle in Yuzuke's way is just some gym rat who can get on demand pumps and ruins 15 shirts a week in an effort to assert dominance. And yet, he is one of the most well-written and compelling villains in all of shonen manga. Just listening to his theme is enough to understand that we're not dealing with an altar boy. The juxtaposition of goofy energy and sinister intents that gave birth to this madman stands as a perfect representation of the story he inhabits. A story that, just like the man with the shades, is more complex and tortured than it appears at first glance. Without spoiling it, I can tell you that the plot quickly evolves from good harmless fun to dark symbolism, pretty much at the instant when yokais make their first apparition. They're essentially interdimensional demons, and they mean business. Most of the conflict in Yu Yu Hakusho is driven by the opposition between humans and these monstrous entities, whose sole purpose in existence seems to be devouring as many people as possible. They constitute an obvious antagonistic force for Yuzuke to clash against, and at first, that's most of what he'll be fighting against. However, this distinction between earthlings and hellish creatures is complicated by the presence of yokais at Yuzuke's side, making it difficult to clearly discern between who's good and who's evil. Urameshi himself is a maelstrom of moral ambiguity, something that is desperately needed in a show whose premise could have turned it into the typical good guy versus bad guy drama. Instead, the story offers an equivocal fresco, where the frontier between hell and heaven is often decided by the spectator's interpretation. The monsters don't just commit atrocities for the sake of evil, and they often offer compelling justifications for their actions, to the point that you might even end up siding with the bad guys. Your favor might also be swayed by the fact that most yokais are jacked out of their minds, while the main cast of characters looks more like a 90s boys band, and are far from rocking bodybuilders' physiques. But don't let appearances fool you. Every single one of Yuzuke's compadres is a straight-up savage, and discovering their skills and personalities is a big part of the fun. Even though their looks are that of edgy middle schoolers, they are closer to Mexican cartels in terms of behavior. Kurama is the perfect example of that. On surface level, he appears feminine and soft, but his alter ego, the frightful Yoko, is the exact opposite. Some of the most gruesome scenes of the anime include him using his devilish plants to infect and destroy a selected host. A method that is closer to torture than actual combat abilities. Yae is similar in that he doesn't hesitate to wipe his enemies off the map, rejoicing in their deaths. Considering he joined the group after getting defeated by Yuzuke, this tells us something about the true nature of our seemingly innocuous main protagonist, who might be just as daunting as the demons he battles. Overall, the show is very violent, but not in a conventional way. While Baki or Roar both use the distortion of human bodies to convey the destructive power of its characters, Yu Yu Hakusho has a more contemplative approach to gore, sometimes bordering on dark romanticism. I remember the impact these gothic opuses had on me as a teenager. The Black Book Club and Chapter Black sagas ranking at the top of my list when it comes to intellectual horror. And unlike what you might think, the most terrifying acts of depravity are not perpetrated by the demons. The story of Toguro and his past life as a human serving as proof of that dissonance. This constant ambivalence leads to a questioning of humanity and its vices, allowing the story to hit its mark, both on a physical and psychological level. To me, that's the sign of a quality fighting manga. Togashi's ability to develop complex characters always prevents the brawls from running stale, which is vital in a series that contains an entire tournament arc. Instead of becoming an endless free-for-all rife with gratuitous slaughter, this portion of the story turns into one of the most memorable shonen sequences ever created, eventually culminating in the fated fight between Yuzuke and Toguro. In the arena, two doctrines confront each other. On one hand, the belief that might makes right, any other reality crumbling in the face of absolute strength. On the other, the conviction that true power can only come from the heart, and that there is no point in getting stronger if not to protect something dear. It's not just about who wins or loses anymore. The clash becomes an ideological battle for the soul of the reader, with the outcome leaving everything to be decided. The show carries on from there, never quite managing to recapture the heights of its first major arc. Some would think it the sign of a failed narrative. I'd rather see it as the proof that the Dark Tournament makes everything else pale in comparison, due to its storyline being qualitatively supreme. However, do yourself a favor and keep watching, as the story still has some riches to give in the form of Shinobu, a treasure of nihilistic complexity, on par with Toguro. You'll also won't want to miss Yuzuke's evolution into Ubermensch, and the entire Nietzschean paradox it precipitates the plot into. A philosophical take that might sound outlandish, considering I originally pitched that show to you using the muscles argument. But that's what's so great about Yuyu. It does both. I've long been preaching the return of educated barbarianism. And while I believe that many shonen stories convey that notion, not one embodies it quite like Yu Yu Hakusho does. It's pensive, but never boring. Brutal, but never crass. Inspiring, but never corny. Intelligent, but never pedantic. And I have good hopes that this story will resonate with you as strongly as it resonated with me. And if it doesn't, that's okay. It just means that you have terrible tastes.